We don't know exactly which day Gabby Petito died, but if it was an average day, statistically, 6 people were killed in this country by their spouses or their intimate partners. We also don't know, and this is really important, whether Gabby Petito was one of those 6. Whether she was involved in domestic violence, as the Wyoming coroner implied in his news conference before telling our Brian Enton he has no direct evidence of that. That is big news. It's big. But we do know about that police interaction in Moab, Utah, a couple of weeks before Gabby likely died. And it is impossible to watch it now, except through the lens of all that has happened since. I want to welcome 2 very knowledgeable and experienced voices to this discussion. Robi Ludwig is a psychologist. She's a clinical therapist and an author. Among her books, and this is telling, is Till Death Do Us Part, Love, Marriage, and the Mind of the Killer Spouse. I am also joined by attorney, legal commentator, and longtime network news reporter, Lise Whale. Ladies, thank you so much for being here. And I'm glad it is you both, because today, when Brian Enton did the interview with the coroner, and the coroner specified that this was hands-on manual strangulation, throttling, which he had not done yesterday and he had not done on the network newscasts last night, it was clear that she died with someone's hands around her neck. And it immediately got us all thinking to that moment in Utah on the body cam in that domestic incident where she specifically spoke about having a hand right there next to what would be her throat, this time instead her face. Let's take a look at it and we'll discuss.
Where did he hit you? Don't worry, just be honest.
He grabbed my face, like this. He didn't hit me in the face, punch me in the face or anything.
Did he slap your face or what?
Well, he grabbed me with his nail, and I guess that's why I definitely have a cut right here because I can feel it.
Yeah.
Touch it, it burns.
Let me just repeat those last words she said. He grabbed me with his nail, which is why I definitely have a cut right here. I can feel it if I touch it. It burns. That is a grab that hurts. Dr. Ludwig, I'd love you to just tell me your thoughts now, connecting that moment that we're looking through with an entirely different prism.
Well, listen, a lot of times when there's abuse in the relationship, it just escalates. And it's very likely her partner was growing more and more out of control. Maybe due to the frustrations, whatever was going on, he was becoming more dangerous. And it sounds like Gabby really took a lot of responsibility for what was going on in the relationship, which is not so uncommon in abusive relationships, where the woman is so psychologically just run down and they really take responsibility for their partner's abusive behavior, and they really believe that they have triggered their partner. So this is just very sad, just hearing all the details behind her death, and one can imagine how frightening and scary it was.
So, Lise, I'm, trying to put on the in advance of any charges, let's be clear, Brian Laundrie's not been charged with anything with regard to Gabby's killing. He's been charged with bank fraud. But, most people are looking at him having taken off into the abyss and thinking that's consciousness of guilt, and it wouldn't be weird if he were charged. Is there a prosecutor out there in this jurisdiction somewhere looking at that tape from Moab and saying, aha, that man grabbed her face hard enough to leave a mark that burned, that was cut? It wouldn't be so much of a jump to think he might lower that hand.
Of course, it's not a jump. And of course, many prosecutors are having that same thought. And Robbie's absolutely right that we know that domestic violence escalates. So it starts with something like a push or a slap, something intimate like that, especially around the face. That's so intimate. And then it can escalate in the most horrible times to murder. And if this was murder by Laundrie, then it was done in such an intimate way again, to the point where, I hate to say this, but Gabby was looking at her killer when she drew her last breath. And we know, unfortunately, as you mentioned at the beginning of the segment, Ashley, that, domestic violence is on the rise. More women are killed by domestic violence than breast cancer. And this pandemic has only made it worse. It's gone sky high during the pandemic.
So, Dr. Ludwig, the coroner, I really needed clarity because he said yesterday in the public news conference, these situations of domestic violence, I'm paraphrasing, but we all thought, wow, holy Moses, are you saying what we think you're saying? You're connecting domestic violence to the case that was on the table in front of you, which can only mean one thing. It wasn't her dad. That it would be Brian Laundrie. And then he sort of obfuscated later on and said it was inadvertent. That doesn't clear it up. And then today with Brian, he said that he was quite clear that he, quote, didn't have any direct evidence of that. But the fact that this had happened in Moab, should we assume ever that it's a one-off, that the incident that you saw play out on that body cam? Was there any clue that you saw in there with your expertise, Robi, to say that is not the first time?
No, and also I saw evidence of psychological abuse. At one point, Gabby was saying that Brian was very upset with her, that he didn't believe in her ability to have a successful blog, which was something that she was working on. How Gabby took responsibility for Brian acting out. She hit him first. She had OCD. So we see the psychological mindset where she was convinced by Brian that everything was her fault. And of course, that's not the case. And also, there's a misconception, too, with physical abuse and violence within relationships, that the partner who kills their lover, that somehow they don't love them. And so very often these victims think, well, my partner loves me, they would never hurt me. But very often in these cases, a partner who's violent does kill the person that they love. And in their mind, they're thinking, if I could just get rid of the bad parts, the frustrating parts, then we can have a successful relationship. And it's really a misguided notion of how relationships work and an over-idealization of what a happy relationship looks like as well.
So, ladies, we're going to go to break, but I want to play something for you before we go to break and get your thoughts on it after the break. It's the final conclusion, really, that the police in Moab came to, and they discussed it between themselves through an open passenger window to a police officer who was driving. So it's two officers speaking about what they feel like they just kind of processed in this whole event between Gabby and Brian. Take a look at this, and after the break, we're gonna parse that and figure out if there was something really missed. Take a look.
The reason why they don't give us discretion on these things is because too many times women who are at risk want to go back to their abuser. They just wanted him to stop, and they don't want to have to be separated. They don't want him charged. They don't want him to go to jail. And then they end up getting worse and worse treatment, and then they end up getting killed. Mm-hmm. In no way, shape, or form that I can perceive does what happened here, a little slap fight between fiancés who love each other, want to be together, can I perceive that this is going to digress into the situation where he's going to be a battered man? Right. But then again, I don't have a crystal ball.
Then again, I don't have a crystal ball. A slap fight between two people who really want to be together. Well, let's dig into that in just a moment. Back with Robi Ludwig and Liz Wheel. Liz, before the break, we saw that moment where the police said this looked like a slap fight between the two people who really want to be together. She said he did it first, she said she did it first, so I don't think he's going to be a battered man, but I don't have a crystal ball. A lot of people have jumped all over those police officers and said, how could they have let that happen? How could they have let them go? But the reality is in the world of the law, that incident pales in comparison to probably 10 other incidents they saw that day.
Right. They're in a tough position. They don't know this couple. Remember, they're traveling through. There's no history that they can pull up of domestic violence between them. So they're in kind of a difficult position. Could they have done more? Possibly. But I do understand kind of what happened there. I want to just say something real quick, Ashley, about the medical examiner saying that there was no direct evidence of domestic violence. That's not really for him to say direct evidence of anything, because domestic violence is an action, obviously. But he did not say it wasn't consistent with domestic violence? And that would be the question he were to be asked if you were on the stand as the medical examiner at a trial, for example. Is this consistent? Is what you saw consistent with domestic violence? He could answer that versus saying this is direct evidence of domestic violence.
Fascinating. Robi, 15 seconds left, just really quickly. You know, the kind of thing you saw out of Moab, would it be a real leap to jump to murder from what you witnessed?
It could be, and it could be even if they were separated, that Gabby and Brian would have found each other, because Gabby could have felt that she could fix Brian and heal him, and Brian may have been in denial about how dangerous he actually was to Gabby.
Yeah.
So it's very complicated.
It really is. I can't thank both of you enough, Lee Sweel and Dr. Robi Ludwig. I hope you'll both come back.